Well, the Victorian election has implications at the federal level. To discuss that and all the other political issues at the moment, I'm joined from Canberra by Labor's Stephen Jones and in Melbourne, Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg. Welcome to both of you remote for the first time of our regular panels.
Good afternoon, Ali.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Josh.
Good afternoon, Ali.
Let's start with your territory, Josh Frydenberg. Less than 20 hours to go before the polls open. Is Ted Baillieu in with a chance?
Absolutely. Ted Baillieu has a very, very good chance of winning tomorrow and has campaigned extremely strongly. It's an 11-year-old, tired, bad Labor government, and where it has key responsibilities in terms of service provision, in health, in transport, in law and order, it's failed graphically. And we've had lots of examples on the ground here, Ali, like the Mikey fiasco, spending more than $1 billion, wasting it, the desalination plant, on law and order issues and policing issues. There's lots and lots of failures, and the Victorian people have had enough.
Stephen Jones, it's not your area as such. You're a New South Wales politician, but what do you think about chances for the government to hold on in Victoria?
I think it's going to be tough for Labor. 11 years. I think that the Victorian government is well acknowledged around the country as one of the most competent state governments, and that's well acknowledged across all sides of politics, a very competent government, but you can't hide behind the fact that they've been there 11 years. Yes, they do have one of the best functioning health systems, one of the best functioning education systems in the country, but it's going to be a tough and very tight election.
What about the role of the Greens, of course, who are so vital in the federal sphere? Josh Frydenberg, the Liberals' preference still seems to have killed off quite a bit of their momentum.
Absolutely, and that was the right call by the Victorian Party. But you've got, the Labor government here in Victoria out there bagging the Greens regularly, and then you've got Julia Gillard, who's in bed with them. And as we have said often in the Parliament, Labor may be in government, but the Greens are in power, and there's some salutary lessons here for Labor federally.
Stephen Jones, would you like to respond to that?
Look, the truth is on the record here, Ali. At the end of this parliamentary section, it really does pain Tony Abbott and Josh to see that we've had 51 pieces of legislation passed through the House, including incredibly important economic legislation, the National Health and Hospital Network Financial Arrangements Bill, which enables us to put the health system and the hospital system on a sustainable footing into the future. Major reforms to childcare, to introduce the National Quality Framework so that when we drop our kids off at childcare centre, we know they're getting the best quality care and education in the country. And as we've seen today, a significant piece of economic reform with the passage of the communications, the Competition and Communications Bill, the structural separation of Telstra and more consumer guarantees through that bill passing through the Senate, which is fantastic news for all Australians.
And Josh Frydenberg, I'll give you an opportunity in a minute to respond to the legislation passed, but I want to look just at that NBN first of all, because of course you're both going to be back in Canberra. Stephen, I don't even know if you're going to bother leaving because you have to be back so quickly, and I'm sure that warms your hearts to know that just when you thought that you were going to have a break, you'll be back. Josh Frydenberg...
my basketball team's going to whip the Sydney Kings back home tonight, so I've got to get home for that.
But Josh Frydenberg, given the bill that's causing all the problems, this bill to split Telstra, it's gone through the Senate now, it had the support of the independents. Why the constant delays to the vote, which means that you both have to go back to Canberra at vast taxpayers' expense on Monday?
It's pretty clear. Nick Xenophon moved his amendments after 4 p.m. yesterday. And quite rightly, opposition senators needed time to look at those amendments. So that's completely a logistical question there. And let's face it with the NBN, Ali, this government is trying to hide from scrutiny. Despite warnings from Treasury, despite warnings from the OECD about this white elephant that it's creating, it has continued to keep the full business case away from the Australian people. And while Stephen likes to point to some of the legislation that's gone through, there was a telling vote on the floor of the House in which the government was defeated 74 votes to 71 about calling for this government to release the full business case, which it still hasn't done. And during the week you had the embarrassing situation for the government where they said to Nick Xenophon, look, we'll show you the business case, but you sign a confidentiality agreement for 7 years. They quickly withdrew that when Nick Xenophon objected. They said, OK, 5 years. Then he objected, and they said, oh, 2 weeks, sign a confidentiality agreement for 2 weeks. He objected, and now he's not subject to that confidentiality agreement, but they haven't released the full business case, only parts of it.
Stephen Jones, was that verging on a comedy of errors there? I mean, to go from 7 years to 2 weeks is a pretty big change of heart.
Oh, look, the comedy, Ali, is the fact that Josh is just grasping at straws. He's looking around for evidence of failure when we're in there governing, getting legislation through the House, and in a week where we have delivered the most significant reform to our telecommunications industry since 1991, when we originally introduced telecommunications. We've got Josh and his party out there whinging about, the difference between whether we release the business case this week or in 3 weeks' time.
It's pretty important, Stephen. It's pretty important, Stephen.
They really are grasping at straws.
Transparency is a joke, isn't it? Transparency is a joke.
What we are delivering is the most significant piece of infrastructure to be rolled out in this country in the last 100 years.
Stephen Conroy, doesn't
you'll get to see the business plan, and when you see the business plan, Josh, you're going to have egg all over your face, mate.
Stephen Jones, isn't seeing the business plan essential, though, when you've got a $36 billion investment? I mean, isn't the business plan a rather important piece of information for people to have?
Now, of course, it's an important piece of information, but what we want to ensure is that when we do release it, first, that it's been through the proper cabinet processes, and that will occur. Secondly, that when we release the business plan, what we are not doing is introducing commercially sensitive information which has been gleaned from discussions with one telecommunications company to their competitors in what is going to be a very competitive market. So Josh would love us to be out there ensuring that the very thing that he is asking for is actually ruining competition within the telecommunications industry, because ultimately they don't stand for that. They stand for protecting the existing oligopoly and the monopoly provisions that Telstra has had for so many years. But when the business plan is released, what will be quite clear is that not only have we delivered through the Parliament the most exciting piece of infrastructure that is going to be rolled out in this country over the next 2 decades, but we are going to do it as we're doing it in Tasmania, on time and under budget. And I think all Australians are going to be excited about it as we are.
You're going to be excited, do you think, when you finally get the business plan?
The things that excite Josh, Ali.
Yeah, that's right. Can I just say, in regards to Tasmania, it has been a very flawed process there. There are lots of examples of people not being happy with the services being provided. The take-up rate has been very low, so the government hasn't come clean about that. We now know that they're going to set up a parliamentary committee to so-called oversight this process, but it's going to be stacked with Labor members. 9 out of 16 members on that committee will be stacked from Labor. Now, if you look at the Murray-Darling Basin equivalent parliamentary committee that was set up to look into that, it's a very balanced committee between coalition members, independents and government. This NBN committee is completely stacked in favour of the government. And we also had this situation during the week, Ali, where the Greens drove Labor's agenda on the eventual privatisation of this NBN, saying that it has to come to the Parliament for a vote. So this is going to make it very difficult. And again, the Greens are driving Labor's agenda.
Stephen Jones, a final comment on the NBN?
What drives our agenda, Ali, is to ensure that when we get the NBN rolled out, that every child in Australia, irrespective of where they live, has access to a world-class education. That the small businesses, the 67% of small businesses in my electorate, for example, who operate from their home, have access to markets right throughout the world, and that wherever you live in Australia, you're going to have access to the expertise of a medical specialist, whether you're in a country town or the centre of a city. Now, Josh is jumping about and repeating the oppositionist rhetoric of his leader, Tony Abbott. The thing that drives our agenda, Ali, is delivering government, delivering legislation, and we are willing to work with the crossbenchers if that helps deliver a good result.
I am no match for the Senate here, and even the Senate went for a very long time, so I'm going to draw a line under the NBN. But let's go back to what you talked about before, Stephen Jones. You talked about the fact 51 pieces of legislation have passed, none none have been defeated. The boss of the government business in the House, Anthony Albanese, he says it's working well. Both of you, this is your first experience of working in federal parliament. But Josh Frydenberg, what's your sense of how this unique, if not unique, it's certainly a new experience. It's the first time for a very long time has been a hung parliament. What's your thoughts on how it's working?
Well, certainly there are some welcome developments, shorter questions and shorter answers. But what I've seen is that this government, during question time, has just given us spin. They don't answer the questions. They're not relevant. And the Prime Minister is into the blame game. She seems to have thrown away the mirror. She needs to look on her own side and see of all the mistakes that they're making rather than trying to blame previous coalition governments for their own mistakes. And, you know, I just think there needs to be a greater focus on relevance to the question, much greater transparency on things like the NBN, where the Parliament can even work more effectively than it is. And I think, you know, that's what we're seeing is that Julia Gillard's giving us sort of two-word slogans and trying to blame everyone else for the government's woes.
Stephen Jones, particularly on that question time issue, I know Christopher Pyne said yesterday that the opposition's still getting what he calls a slag and bag from the government. I mean, are the new rules for question time, Stephen Jones, are they working?
Well, look, as every Australian schoolchild knows, if you ask a stupid question, you're likely to get an equally stupid answer. And anyone who's sat through...
This is what we mean. This is what we mean, Ali.
Who's sat through question time over the last week can see that the quality of the questioning has been pretty poor. But the real point is here. Look, yes, we have walked into different circumstances here in the 43rd Parliament because between 2004 and 2007 John Howard and the Coalition had control of both houses of Parliament. They had to negotiate or consult with nobody, and the result was work choices and other pieces of terrible legislation, crook processes. They had no intention and no bother about negotiating with anyone. We've got a different Parliament, and yes, we make no apology for the fact that in the process of trying to govern and get those 51 pieces of legislation through, we sit down and talk to the crossbenchers and, yes, even people on Josh's side of politics to ensure that we get a better result and we get the legislation through, and we don't apologise for that.
Ali, can I...
Yes?
I was also going to say the government sort of released without proper consultation their timetable, their parliamentary sitting timetable for next year. And what's quite clear from that is, in terms of the reduced weeks that they will be subject to scrutiny, that they've tried to bookend a lot of it for when we have a new Senate. And the reason why they've done that is because there are going to be more Greens in the Senate. So I just warn this government, you know, be careful what you wish for by trying to get into bed with the Greens on all these policies.
Josh, there's a very simple answer to that, mate, and the very simple answer to that is if we've got a lot of legislation currently before Parliament, and if you're so worried about the future Senate after July 1, 2011, pass the legislation before then, mate. Stop blocking and obstructing and opposing and carrying on like you have done for the last 5 months.
Well, you say sit more, Josh Frydenberg. You'll both get a chance to sit again on Monday, and we will talk again next week. Many thanks to both of you. May the best man win tomorrow's election. Stephen Jones in Canberra and Josh Frydenberg in Victoria. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you.
Thanks, Ali.
Well, a reminder now of one of the stories